You're listening to Help Me, I'm a Comedian. It's a show where we ask a comedian to come in and share a topic of pain, something that's on their mind, while a psychologist offers some insight on that subject. You're joined now by comedian Mark McConville and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. Hello to you both.
Hi, Ashwin. How are you, mate? All right?
I'm good, thanks.
Hi, Ashwin.
It's a good evening, and it is an interesting show today that we've got to you. It's a little bit different because my next comedian, he started university at the age of 45 after not even completing high school. He went straight back into the deep end in order to study suicidology. And this is after 2 decades working as a comedian. But Mark, you didn't see those 2 careers as completely separate. Can you tell us why you made that change?
Well, it was actually a chance encounter with a husband and wife after a show. So I'd done a show on the cruise ship Pacific Jewel back in 2012. And, 1 hour show in front of 1,000 people, late night comedy, it's all good fun. And then after the gig, I'm just at the bar relaxing and I noticed this couple walking towards me, kind of mid to late 30s, pretty fit looking, and the lady's crying. And I'm thinking, what's going on there? And it takes me back every time I tell this story because she came up to me and she wrapped her arms around me and she said, I don't know how I can possibly thank you because I haven't seen my husband laugh out loud for 3 years. And, comedians get it a lot where people might come up to you after a show going, that was great, mate, I needed that, or I haven't laughed in days or weeks or whatever. But 3 years, I was like, how on earth is that even possible? So I chatted to this couple for hours into the middle of the night, and it turned out that the guy was an ex-SAS soldier who 3 years previously was in Afghanistan, and he was conducting a patrol. He kicked open a door and it was booby-trapped and it blew him up. It killed one of his guys and injured him to the point where he couldn't actively serve anymore. And so here's a guy standing in front of me going, mate, you've done more for me in one night than 3 years of post-traumatic stress management and everything else that the Defence Forces tried to help me with because you've just made me laugh for an hour, Yeah. And I was pretty funny, actually, that night, I will say.
You must have been.
Yeah.
And it was his wife that really, brought it to our attention because she was annoyed at the fact that for the last 3 years, the people that were looking after her husband's rehabilitation at no point had said, are you still able to laugh? Do you still have your sense of humour? Do you still feel as though you can access it? It was quite a powerful encounter for me because, the response that I got from both of them, like he was just incredible to talk to, and in his wife's eyes, I'd given her a husband back, and all I'd done was my show, So I got off the ship and really sat with me, this meeting. So then I started to look at, the old chestnut, laughter is the best medicine, and what it does and why it's important. And, because as a comedian, I'd just taken it for granted that, I hadn't really looked into that side of it. So I started to investigate the health benefits of laughter and then obviously humour as a construct that creates the laughter and where that sits into psychology and then that actually led me to investigating, the rates of stress, anxiety and depression in society. And then the flow on from that was, obviously the rates of suicide and then attempted suicide. And by the time I got to there, I was like, wow, this is an incredible problem in our society, and this is way back in 2012, 2013. And I thought I just happened to work in an industry that could possibly make a difference, have a positive impact. So I had this grand plan of creating a formal link between the comedy industry and mental health. So my ultimate goal is I reckon you should be able to go to the comedy club on a Friday night, pay $30 for your ticket, buy a comedian's DVD for $20, and then go to Medicare on a Monday morning and get a full refund.
Got a full refund.
Because we've proven through research that you're laughing for 3 hours a week's good for you.
Yeah. Rachel, as a psychologist, is there a gap where laughter is treated as the neglected child of therapy? It's not given much respect in treatment?
Lots of really helpful and healing aspects of our psyche that are left out of psychological therapy, which seems ironic. I mean, we're very much fans of crying in therapy, which is really, very useful because laughter and crying are both a form of release, physiological and emotional release. And so we all encourage our clients or patients to cry. Maybe it depends how funny your therapist is.
So does this mean, we've all had those instances where we've laughed till we've cried? Is that like the ultimate then?
I definitely think some therapists use humour, but we're not trained in it. We're not encouraged to use it, and I think that's a shame.
Well, it's, from what little that I learned about in therapy, like, would I be right in saying it's a fantastic way of building the therapeutic alliance between clinician and patient?
Absolutely. If you have a really good laugh with someone, you do feel more connected to them afterwards, don't you? Yeah. But you also change the relationship with the material that you're laughing about, right? So something that's quite dark and heavy, once we laugh about it, we can deal with it and deal with it differently.
I was always fascinated, Mark, when you started this project. Like, you're creating a science of humour. You're categorising it and you're making diagnoses. If you have dark humour, you should do this. If you have puns, you should do that. I'm not sure if I'm characterising it correctly, but can you summarise, after your Masters, what you learned about humour?
Well, the Humour Styles Questionnaire, which is basically, kind of the benchmark when it comes to categorising different styles of humour, they talk about 2 positive styles and 2 negative styles. So the 2 positive styles are affiliative, which is what comedians do, making other people laugh. If you're that person at a barbecue, snappy comment for your mates. And self-enhancing humour, which is what a lot of, say, emergency services personnel might use, or Defence Force personnel. So they use humour as a way of coping with high degrees of exposure to trauma. Now, the research has shown that if you score highly on both of those styles, it's a negative correlation with symptoms of depression. Whereas if you score low on both of those, there's a high correlation with symptoms of depression. And the 2 negative styles are aggressive and self-defeating, so laughing at the expense of someone else or laughing at the expense of yourself. So, and it works in reverse. Okay. Score high on those, positive correlation with symptoms of depression. Score low, negative. But the problem is, this research was done in, North America, Canada, and in Australia, our sense of humour is so unique, and I would argue, my goal is to do research to show that the Australian sense of humour, we can actually use aggressive humour and self-defeating humour in a positive light, because if you go, there's that old saying that if we like you, we, I don't have to finish. That's the ABC, right? Or,
take the mickey out.
Yeah, that's right. Or if you go into a group of people that you don't know, sometimes putting yourself down is a way of them realising that you think, I'm no better than you, and it's a way of being accepted into the group. There's tons of research out there that have been done for the health benefits of humour and laughter, right? It's been researched for decades around the world. But everything that I found involved a group dynamic, and it involved, say, put it in simple terms, researchers showing a group of people a heap of funny clips and measuring their baseline heart rate or, cognitive abilities prior to being exposed to this humour and stuff, and then afterwards. And to me, I looked at it in the way that from a comedian's point of view, I go, well, our sense of humour is so unique to every single person, and I talk about this in the laughter clinic. What makes a police officer or a paramedic or a fiery laugh could offend a primary school teacher.
Yeah.
And does that make it wrong? Absolutely not, because they're using humour as a way of coping with a high degree of trauma. So to me, when you've got a heap of people in a room and you're showing them content that a researcher has chosen, a certain amount of people might be laughing because they find it funny. Some people might be laughing because laughter's contagious. Some people might find it mildly amusing. So to me, the results were always going to be diluted, right? So in the program that I developed, the laughter therapy sessions that I get the clients to self-initiate has to be content that they've chosen for themselves, no one else.
As you're talking, I was reminded of a 1-hour lunchbox session that I used to run in various workplaces, and I did run it for the police. And then the next day I ran the same session for a group of librarians, and I used the word crap. So I was talking about the crap in your mind.
Right.
And I got a complaint. The librarians called my boss and said that I swore during the workshop. And I thought, Yeah, they didn't think
Whereas
that
the
was
police would have
amusing
been,
at all.
"Geez, you're rather tame."
Yeah.
That's right. So you're absolutely right. The sort of microcultures within each professional group differ enormously, and depending on the culture you're going into.
And
style.
so would you say, Rachel, that your sense of humour is a result of your entire life experiences that have led you up to this? And I haven't seen any research on it, but, as opposed to how your sense of humour changes over time, like what you might laugh at in your 20s, you might not laugh at in your 40s or something.
My understanding is that your sense of humour is heavily environmentally influenced.
Right.
Obviously, there are genetic factors for personality and temperament, which might also affect whether you find certain groups of people appealing or resonate or not with different environmental factors. But yeah, it's a very much influenced by the environment.
Yeah. I find also sometimes there's a trade-off between being funny and being interesting. Sometimes when you meet people for the first time, you can riff and it's quite superficial, but it's riffing. Whereas if you're interesting, you might ask a deeper, more personal question. And I'm actually more drawn to the interesting questions rather than the funny questions. Have you got any thoughts about that, about the difference between being funny or
even
being interesting?
amusing? Sometimes I find some comedians amusing, even if I'm not, crying with laughter.
Yeah.
Just that amusement factor. Like you said, it's not just laughter, isn't it? It's humour, it's amusement, it's interest.
I find some of the most interesting, deep and meaningful conversations I've had in my entire lifetime have been with comedians off stage.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been a laughter-driven conversation or a humour-driven conversation. It's been, insightful. It's been sharing, snippets of wisdom and what people have learned throughout their lifetime. And
yeah. Because they've got this scalpel already for digging into the human psyche, which they add punchlines to on stage. But off stage, still got the same scalpel. They can still be deep and introspective. They just don't have to dress it up with jokes. So it's quite interesting talking to comedians in general, which is why we do the show, because they're so authentic and raw. So it's interesting you talked earlier about because there's a move towards personalised medicine. You're talking about personalised comedy. Feels very much a part of the times at the moment. Can you tell us more about, once you've dissected the type of humour a person has and the content they need, what happens? What is this process that you put people through to improve their mental health?
so the first question we start with is probably, to me, one of the most important questions I believe you can ask yourself, and that is, what makes me laugh as an individual? It doesn't matter what anybody else says. What is it that makes me laugh? And as we just said, it's different for everybody. So what I get our participants to do is we build a laughter library, right? So we give them a week to, if you've got a mobile phone with a YouTube account or whatever, we create a playlist, call it your laughter library. And I say to people, if you don't know how to create a playlist on YouTube, ask a 10-year-old.
That's right.
All over it.
Or
all over it.
6-year-old.
6-year-old, yeah.
And you're allowed to say crap in this laughter library.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, if it's cats playing the piano is your thing, or if it's a certain comedian or whatever it is, do a search, find a heap of clips and just chuck them in there, so it's that way. Now you've got a content supply of stuff that you've chosen for yourself. And it can be anything from 2-minute clips to 30-minute clips, whatever it is that you find humorous, put it in there. And at the same time that we're asking them to examine what is it that makes them laugh, we go, when was the last time you laughed and who was it with? Because more often than not, there's a big difference between laughing by yourself at something that you're watching on TV or whatever, as opposed to the social engagement of laughter, and that's, the times that we're in at the moment. One of my biggest aches over the last year and a half, so I've got many, but the biggest one is the term social distancing. I hate it. I hate it with a passion, because they're asking us to be physically distanced. We need to be socially connected now more than ever, and laughter is a big way of doing that.
You're listening to ABC Radio with Help Me, I'm a Comedian, and you're hearing from psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam and comedian Mark McConville. You are going to hear some sensitive material today on the show, so if there's something that you would like to talk to a professional about, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14.
The other thing is that I encourage people to examine who it is in the circle of people that they know, whether it's their family, their workmates, their friends, whoever, that has that similar sense of humour. Because we all know, like if you guys think about it, there's people in your life that you know that you can have a laugh with and you share that kind of outlook. And there's people that you know that they're still friends, they're still work colleagues, you still like them, but you just know that they don't have the similar sense of humour. So once we get them to examine what it is that makes them laugh, they build a bit of a catalogue of content, and then we encourage them to give themselves a daily laughter therapy session. You know, ideally I advocate for maybe 20 to 30 minutes. So if you're able to not watch the news and switch that off and spend half an hour watching some comedy of some sort, you know, I've had participants that have done their laughter therapy session before they've gone to bed and laughed, you know, instead of listening to music to relax them. Or if you throughout the day, you know, you've got a couple of minutes between a meeting or whatever, you can give yourself that break. But as long as you're doing it every day. And then the follow-on from that is later on in the program, so about 5 weeks, we get them to share the laughter, right? So starting with what is it that makes me laugh? How can I bring more laughter into my life? And then how can I bring more laughter into the lives of those around me? And what the last part does is it diminishes the sense of hopelessness. It diminishes the sense of emotional isolation, which is warning sign for depression and suicidality. And at the same time, we're saying to them, you have to be mindful. And this is where that acknowledgement of, you know, not everybody is going to appreciate what you think is funny. So finding those people in your life that you know have that similar sense of humour, because obviously our goal is to not offend anybody and not hurt relationships. We want to build them. So you need to be mindful of who you're sharing what with.
Can you tell us things that you've learned about suicide prevention and perhaps how humour can fit into that?
It's incredibly complex, suicide prevention, incredibly complex. And one of the biggest things I find is it comes down to me personally to education. You know, like so many times you hear acquaintances, friends, family members that are left behind after someone they know who's taken their own life. And a very common thing is, you know, we didn't realise they were struggling as much as they were, or, you know, we had no idea. It happened out of the blue. Yeah. And what we know for sure is it never, ever happens out of the blue, ever. There are warning signs, there are risk factors, there are protective factors. It's a very complex, you know, brew of emotional things going on. So, you know, we're in Mental Health Month at the moment. We've just had Are You OK Day recently. And a lot of the events that I was at, I was talking to people about, you know, to me it is all about education. You can't be expected to know if someone's struggling if you don't exactly know what to look for, you know. So I try and break it down to make it as digestible as possible for people to get. So to me there was a top 3. And Rachel, if you want to add to this, I'd be more than happy to take it on board. So to me, the top 3 are warning signs that someone might be struggling is hopelessness, isolation and burdensomeness. So hopelessness is not having anything to look forward to. Isolation is being emotionally isolated from your friends and family. And burdensomeness, which is to me the red flag, the big ticket item, is if you hear someone say this specific sentence, you know, my friends and family would be better off without me around. That is the red flag.
It's the biggest red flag.
It is, because in their mind, they honestly believe that to be the case. And it will never, ever, ever be the case.
You're listening to ABC Radio. I'm speaking with comedian Mark McConville and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam.
Some experts in the field of resilience say what we're really needing to become resilient to is the feeling of shame. Because, you know, fear has utility. You know, if I'm afraid, maybe I'm afraid for good reason, I should really listen to my fear, or maybe I want to conquer my fear. So if we learn how to listen to fear, then we can really use it, and there's nothing wrong with fear. However, shame, which is the belief, it's negative self-evaluation, and it's the belief that I'm defective, I'm not good enough. Not just that my behaviour was ineffective, but I'm defective. And so this is at the heart of depression for most people who suffer with it. You know, there's something wrong with me. And if, you know, and so my clients in my office who've been bullied at school or online, they're feeling shame. They're feeling unworthy of love and belonging. So that shame leads to isolation. It leads to addiction. It leads to self-harm, and it can even lead to suicide if there's enough of it. So if we can teach people about shame, Ashwin knows I bang on about shame all the time, but if we can teach people what it is, what triggers it, how to recognize it, how to speak about it, and we can become resilient against that feeling so that it doesn't take us right down into the trenches, then I think that would go a long way.
I find it very reassuring when I hear other people. This is more from a physical perspective. I have plantar foot, so I got inflammation in my foot. It hurts to walk sometimes. I was telling someone about that the other day, and they said, oh, yeah, I have a blood condition. And I was like, oh, yeah, bodies aren't perfect. Bodies break down. Everyone's got some kind of physical ailment, even though they appear so perfect on the outside. To what extent do you see people hiding their pain and suffering?
In Australia, because I do a lot of work in rural areas as well, there is a deep-seated stoicism in Australia that it's like, that she'll be right. I've had farmers that have thought they've got a 2 million acre property and it's been handed down from generation to generation to generation. And it's like, well, my father made it work, my grandfather made it work, I'm the failure. And it's like, well, no, you're dealing with a different set of circumstances to what they were dealing with 100 years ago. And this, a lot of men I find in rural areas have a gender identity crisis going on because it's like, in a lot of rural communities in Australia, the only way that the farm or the property is still being able to move forward is when the wife or the mother is going out and supplementing the income of the property by teaching, cleaning, secretarial, whatever it is that they're doing. And the same thing, these guys are going, well, my mum never worked, my grandmother never worked, and it's like, well, and I say to these guys, in my household, it's a team effort, when I have to do stuff, my wife does this, that and the next. When she has to, my wife works in the film industry, so when she's working on a film, she's working 70 hours a week for like 9 months straight. So I am chief cook, cleaner, bottle washer, dog poo, patrol, picker-upper,
but
everything.
These guys, in their context, they feel shame. They're negatively evaluating themselves as not doing good enough, so that's the emotion that they're feeling. And shame begets shame, as you said before, so then they don't want to reach out for help because that's shameful. They don't want to talk about it. So we have shame about our shame.
That's self-stigma.
It's self-stigma, yeah. And it correlates with depression, anxiety, addiction, and shame is the emotion we feel when we're hiding our issues. Shame doesn't come with a facial expression. Charles Darwin talked about shame. It has no facial expression, but it has a slight body sort of posture of just, you can imagine your shoulders slightly hunched, your head slightly down. Yeah. There's no facial expression for shame in any culture, so it's very much a hidden emotion for us, with not being the only one without a facial expression. So, it's such a difficult one to confront.
Do you think, Rachel, that that's a fear of vulnerability?
It's a fear of vulnerability. It's one of the most difficult and painful emotions to admit to. But it's so liberating. I remember the first time I got this, I really got it. I was like, oh, that's shame. I feel shame. I could say to my husband, I feel ashamed about this. And when I got used to it and got my mouth around it, it was sort of like, oh, good, I'm not a psychopath. Yeah. Excellent. Someone give me a certificate.
Yeah, okay. Okay, some good ideas here. Get used to shame. It sounds like a prominent one for you as well. And Mike, you've talked about a couple of cultural ideas as well, the stoicism in our culture that is a problem. Where would you like to take this research that you're doing next? It sounds quite groundbreaking. You're trying to create a science of humour and laughter. What would you like to see change in therapy and in treatment?
I would like to see it like humour and laughter therapy or education in all of its forms, not only just the program that I've come up with, but there's lots of people out there doing fantastic work, be recognised as an adjunct therapy for stress, anxiety and depression. I'm incredibly grateful that the support that I've had through Griffith University and in particular the Australian Institute for Suicide Research and Prevention, those guys, the belief that they have shown in me and what it is that I'm doing, like when I finished my master's, they said, look, we'd be willing to support you going on and doing a PhD in this. And I spoke with my wife about it, and we were like, that because that master's degree was a big strain. Like, it was a big task for me to get that done. So I didn't really want to go and spend another 4 years at uni to get that PhD. I would rather go out into...
You'd rather stick a fork in your eye. I know.
So I said, I want to go out into the community and start to, make a difference with the knowledge that I've got. And in the last 3 years, there's the personal emails and messages that I get, a week after or a couple of days after someone's been in one of my laughter clinics. Yeah. It's so gratifying knowing that I've been able to help someone in some way.
I'm glad someone's on this because now we recognise music therapy as a thing. I mean, they don't get Medicare rebates, but music therapy, art therapy, I think we need laughter and humour therapy as an adjunct therapy.
Sounds like you found that purpose, that conversation on the cruise ship sparked for you when that person came out.
I'm incredibly lucky. And, I have tried, and I'm going to use this platform, if you don't, I have tried on numerous occasions to find that guy, because I would love nothing better than to, A, know that he's okay, and to B, let him and his wife know what resulted as from that chance encounter.
Do you remember his first name?
No.
You can't remember anything about their names.
Well, if you're listening and you remember the name, Mark McConville, what cruise ship and where were you at the time?
All I remember, I've tracked it down, it was the Pacific Jewel in mid-2012 out of Sydney.
Well, if you are listening, you have sparked a lot of change in Australia yet to come, because the way we're going to treat people will hopefully change and become a lot broader. You've been listening to Help Me, I'm a Comedian. If you'd like to speak to someone after anything you've heard in today's conversation, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14. I'm Ashwin Segkar, and you've also been hearing today from comedian Mark McConville and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam.